Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode we're going to discuss about the climate change and climate change issues. And we have many famous speakers today from around the world. We have Madam Paula, we have Professor Dave, Madam Viva, Laurent, Professor Edwards, Professor Donalds, Mr. Paul, Mr. Alex. More speakers will join today. So I'm sure that from around the world we are creating more awareness on climate change, and we will discuss more on sustainable issues and how we can collaborate together and work together. This is 206th episode for World Talent Economy Forum. Already, we are collaborating with 5 million students in Asia Pacific. Already, only from India, we are engaged with 1 million students, and from different countries, we are working with different peoples and organizations. And most important thing is that our target is to achieve 100 million students, and we want to share our content in between our community. I want to start with Professor Edward. He will share his experience and some point about climate change.
Well, thank you, first of all, for putting this on. I think this is a very important discussion. I apologize. I have to get off in about 5 or 7 minutes for another call. But maybe what I can do to frame the issue is to offer a somewhat skeptical note about the climate issue, or perhaps a cautionary note, so we can put this all in proper context. I want to distinguish, first of all, between global warming, which is really what we're talking about, and environment, which is another issue. And I maintain that there's a conflict between the attempt to deal with supposed global warming problems and the real, what I would call real environmental problems that need to be dealt with. For example, let's take a look at the data. In 1990, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued its first report and predicted that the climate would be warming up by 0.3 degrees centigrade per century, or per decade. That is 3 degrees per century. In their fifth report in 2014, they reduced that prediction to 0.2 degrees centigrade per decade, or 2 degrees per century. In the 30 years, almost a third of a century since their 1990 report, the actual data, you can look at this from the chief climatologist at who was at NASA Huntsville. The actual temperature rise has only been 0.13 degrees per decade, or 1.3 degrees centigrade per century. That is less than half of what the UN's original 1990 predictions were. Or, for example, in 2005, in the United States, we have an organization called the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they, of course, do a lot of measurements as well. And they set up a special climate reference network. One of the problems with measuring climate is that a lot of times the measuring devices and stations are right next to like an airport runway. So they're not really measuring climate, they're measuring a heat sink. So they set up they went into operation in 2005, a climate reference network with over 100 stations to actually measure climate. And what they found over the past 15 years is that the climate, at least in the lower 48 states of the United States, has not been warming up. Now, I suspect that that's just a fluke, because climate has been warming up for several hundred years at a pretty steady pace. It goes up and down, so you can take a look at that data. My point here is that I think you have to look with a skeptical eye about the problems with climate. You see a lot of benefits, by the way, of the fact that carbon dioxide has been increasing in the atmosphere. For decades, we've seen record crop yields across the world because, after all, carbon dioxide is food for plants. So that's, in a sense, the good news. The other thing I'd warn about is this. I think we all agree that it would be great to have less costly energy in the future, because energy actually fuels industrial growth. It fuels our economies. It's very, very important. But if you take a look, and by the way, the chart that you just put up is if you take a look at climate change over the past literally millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and centuries, you see that there's just a lot of up and down. You see that climate was much warmer during the so-called medieval warm period in Europe. So again, I say, take a look at the data. And here's the final thing I'll leave you with. We all want less costly energy. I'm sitting here in a house and looking at the snow outside of my window in Washington, D.C. area. But here's the problem. If you take a look at the two main renewables, that is to say, solar and wind, you find some problems with them. We need to increase efficiency, first of all, with them. A lot of environmentalists, and here's where I say there's a conflict, environmentalists in the United States have often opposed the big windmills because they destroy habitats and the like. The best place to put windmills would be out at sea, off of the shore, because the wind is always blowing offshore. But there's only one wind farm offshore in the United States, which is in New England. The reason is because environmentalists for decades have opposed these because they destroy habitats. Here's the other big problem. The solar panels and the windmills require, and all the batteries that are needed to store energy when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, about 2 billion, by the way, would be needed in the United States if we went to all green energy, require huge amounts of rare earth elements mined in China and Mongolia, cobalt mined in the Congo, and lithium mined in various places in South America. Various international groups have pointed out the incredible environmental damage and human damage in these areas just with the mining we're doing right now, especially in Congo, where something like 40,000 children are exposed in the cobalt mining industry. So what I'm saying is this: take a look at sustainability with a critical eye. Models have historically been wrong in terms of predicting exactly how the climate will do. Look at real environmental issues and real environmental damage that can actually be done in an attempt to reduce supposed or global warming. So what I'm saying is, look at the data, have a skeptical eye, make sure that the cure, so to speak, is not worse than the disease. So those are my thoughts, and I'm sorry I have to leave very soon, but hopefully that will frame the discussion so that it becomes a productive discussion. The people who are, in worse shape about these things are unfortunately in less developed countries, so we don't want that. So anyway, those are my remarks, and I'm happy to, anyone who's interested can email me, and I'm happy to follow up with citations and data since I have a lot of it. I'm putting my
Thank you.
Contact information in there. So that's my.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Madam Viva, you are new guest for World Talent Economy Forum. Can you please introduce yourself and your company with our forum?
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Sharif. My name is Viva. I am a climate engineer and an environmental engineer, and I have a technology which we're offering for climate change to disperse hydroxyl radicals into the atmosphere as a universal pollution sink. And we have modeled over the last 10 years the technology in the lab. And what we're doing now is offering offsetting services to governments that are looking at offsetting the emissions gap that they have with the hydroxyl radical. And our current CO2 equivalent price when we start up will be $25 a CO2 equivalent. And when we scale up, it'll only cost $10 a CO2 equivalent. It's a highly efficient technology. It's exponentially more efficient than sucking the atmosphere to our equipment because we disperse it. And it is a highly sustainable technology because it uses yttria zirconia ceramic, which is 100% recyclable. And the actual cell that we're working with is worth about 40,000 trees every year, and we'd like to scale up to about 52,000 of these cells, which each of them only have 55 parts. So it's very easy to adopt. It's actually low tech, And it is a nature-based solution because hydroxyl radicals exist naturally in the atmosphere, and we want to go up and enhance that natural sewer system that we have working for us. So we've been in the background a lot working with government, and we have found that where the real problem is a top-down problem with policy and politicians. So we work at that level, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, but that's the introduction that I'd like to give.
Thank you. Mr. Lauren, how do you want to introduce these climate change issues with our audience?
Well, I'm the founder of Climate Change Guide, which is a website that gives information about climate change. And I just want to start by responding to Edward. So Edward put a link in the private chat to the Heartland Institute. And for those who don't know, the Heartland Institute is known to spread climate change denial. So I just want to give like a warning to people who go to that site. I'm going to provide a link from Climate Reality. So basically, there's a bunch of think tanks that are spreading climate change denial. So the Heartland Institute is one of them. Heritage Foundation is another one. If people want to learn more about this issue, which I think is important, there's a great documentary called Merchants of Doubt. And the Merchants of Doubt is about how the fossil fuel industry and other industries have spent a lot of money to spread denial, whether it's climate change or other topics. The companies such as the tobacco industry, they spread a lot of denial about the dangers of cigarettes. And some of the same people who work for the tobacco industry, they also work for the oil industry to say that climate change is a hoax and so on. So just to give a warning to people who spread denial. So just to say a general statement, I think when it comes to climate change, I think it's important that not only do we spread awareness about the reality of climate change, but we need to also spread awareness about why it's important. So people need to understand that it's not just important because it affects polar bears, but it will have a very big human impact. So just air pollution alone kills millions of people per year, and the effects of climate change could have a huge impact on a huge amount of people. So if you just look at climate refugees, there could be over 1 billion climate refugees by 2070. So there's a tremendous human impact, especially when you add up all the different effects of climate change, whether it's the increase in heat waves, wildfires, floods, hurricanes, rising sea levels, and many, many other effects. So again, I think it's important to not just know about the reality of climate change, but why it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lauren. Professor Dev, you are actually working with the schools student, and already in Malaysia we are taking some of schools developing their department of sustainabilities and other things from World Talent Economy forums, and definitely like expert like today's panelists, we want to work together to develop the future youth communities. So what the fact you have, we can train our youth communities regarding the climate change and what's going on around the world. What your experience you want to share with us?
Well, of course, the internet is a great resource, and I just, as our previous speaker was speaking, I checked for Heartland Institute, and there's a huge discussion about where they get their funding and what their real purpose is, and they also deny the negative effects of secondhand smoke. So you know where that money's coming from. So you have buyer beware is the first thing I would say. The issue that I deal with is how to slow things down, how to get us back to where we should be if it's at all possible. And so I work in two areas. I work with youth activism, getting kids involved, and I work on things like marches and protests. In other words, how we put pressure on the top level. And I think that working at those two levels is where I see we must put our effort. On the one hand, getting Greta Thunberg and her generation on board, and the younger kids, and also going out and putting pressure on governments, and sometimes it works. The Keystone XL pipeline is a great example. More than 10 years ago, Bill McKibben and a lot of people went to the White House, the Obama White House, and we all sat outside the White House and got arrested. We got arrested protesting against the Keystone XL pipeline coming from Canada. Hi, Canadians. And, we did that because we wanted the Keystone XL pipeline to be canceled, the project to be canceled. Well, it's taken more than 10 years, but finally, about a week ago, it was canceled. It'll probably come back again. It has many times, but that's one way we work. We work at the protest level so that we get visibility at the top. The other way we work is going school to school. And when we go school to school, we are now working with a book, and we weren't doing that before. We were just going school to school and spending the day in the school, working with the kids during the day. And then in the evening, the parents would come in, and we had a checklist that we worked down with the parents about all the things they could do in order to reduce their carbon and water footprint and to be good green citizens. Well, now we've got a book, the Green Actioneers Workbook, and it's going to come out in the fall when school comes back into session here in the US, because we distribute it at family night at school. It's not a kid's book, it's everybody's book. It's got a coloring book feature for the little kids. It's got word games for the older kids. It's in English and it's in Spanish. And I'm sure we will eventually have an English and French version for French Canada, so that we will have an ability to go in and deal with every member of the family and get them to express their concerns and find some solutions.
I'm not going to be able to jump in.
Thank you, Professor Donald. How do you want to introduce the problem of climate change and how we can work together on these issues? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes. One of the things I'm very interested in, because of my sociology background, is how the denial of it works. And it was fascinating that you had somebody from the Heartland Institute. I just thought that was absolutely amazing, because if you want to get the two sides of the story, I'll reiterate what others have said. The Heartland Institute is an organization that has basically scientists for hire that appear on Fox News and places like that to come up with arguments about why climate change doesn't happen. They are not climate scientists. They are actually people who got a degree in some sort of thing, engineering or physics, 50 years ago or 40 years ago, and they're not active scientists. In fact, if you do research, there's been a knowledge that they say 97% of climate scientists believe that there's global warming and that the climate is changing as a consequence. I'll mention that in a second, but that turned out, subsequent studies have shown that yes, Heartland Institute is wrong. The Heartland Institute is right about that. That number is wrong. It's actually 100%. There is not a single solitary peer-reviewed paper that in any of the reputable journals that have evidence that there's no global warming. In fact, it's impossible for there not to be global warming, because the physics of the situation make it be that as the carbon dioxide increases, more heat is going to be trapped, and that's just, there's no way to change that. I think it brings over an overall problem that's a larger problem. I can talk later about some of the consequences of climate change, but what's really interesting to me is the way that people have been systematically devaluing truth. Oh, I want to mention one other thing the Heartland Institute was hired to debunk, which was the acid rain. They were one of the people who were on about how we didn't have to lower the sulfur content of coal and blah 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 because acid rain was just a fake. It was killing lakes, ruining environment all over the world. And when we lowered the sulfur, it fixed it. I mean, so they were so wrong. But the that's what they do. They're an organization that is hired. They're a marketing organization that's hired by oil companies and earlier the tobacco industry to come up with fake news. And so what I want to say, and I'll talk about this more later during the course of the thing, is that the most important thing for a student or anyone to learn is how to be able to find good information and accurate information. And I put a link to an organization called Skeptical Science. And one of the things that you really need to do is to, when you hear a fact, don't believe it. Just automatically don't believe it. I don't care what organization, what you're studying. I don't care if it's sociology, chemistry, environment, or anything. When somebody tells you something, don't believe them. And then take yourself and go yourself and start trying to convince yourself of whether it's true or not. And if you go to organizations that have .org at the end of them, .gov at the end of them, these people have an investment in trying to be accurate. Because if a scientist fakes data, they're not going to be able to work as a scientist again in their life. That's it. I mean, they're going to be able to work as marketing people at the Heartland Institute, but they're never going to work as a scientist. And so whether the information, so you never know for sure if anything's accurate, but you can think to a degree, think about what is the consequences of the person giving you inaccurate information. And and any good place, when somebody says a fact, they're going to have a footnote or they're going to have references and they're going to tell you why it is that they're saying that that's a fact. Go and look and go and check. And something I'd really advise doing is Google predatory journals, because there are 10,000 journals that are fake. People pay to publish articles in them. They're not, they claim they're peer reviewed, but they're not. But there's actually websites that will give you lists of these journals. And that's where, when the Heartland Institute tells you that there's a peer reviewed article about this or that or the other thing, that's where they come from. Fake journals that exist just to support the Heartland Institute's propaganda. Okay, and that's part, and I'll keep talking about that, but I want to hear, you've got the most amazing panels, and I really would like to hear from other people.
Thank you. Mr. Paul, how do you want to share your experience about climate change with our audience?
Yeah, basically what's happening with climate is extremely serious. A report came out recently saying that the global average temperature was 1.25 degrees Celsius above the, they called it pre-industrial, but their baseline was 1880 to 1910, so the turn of the last century. Now, and then they compared it to the 2 degrees Celsius guard band that from the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change and all of the COP conferences. And there's a little bit of a problem here, because when the 2 degrees Celsius safe temperature rise above pre-industrial was first given in these conferences and by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their baseline was for pre-industrial was the year 1750. You can look back and see where that number first appears. And yeah, the problem is that the baseline at the turn of the last century was already 0.3 degrees Celsius warmer than the 1750 true pre-industrial. So add 0.3 to 1.25, we're talking about 1.55 degrees Celsius for the global average temperature relative to 1750 or pre-industrial. And this was it last year, so in 2020. Now, you need to also be aware. So we've already passed 1.5, in other words, when you compare apples to apples. And that's global average temperature. If you're on the land versus, most of us live on land versus the ocean, the temperature of the land is rising much, much faster than that of the ocean. If you're at any elevation, then as you go up in elevation, the temperature rises even more. It's almost double what the global average is. Land temperature is almost double on average what the global average temperature is. And also, as you go up in latitude, the temperature is rising much, much faster. So the Arctic, north of, say, about 60 degrees is 2 or 3 times faster, the warming, than the global average. Go up to the high Arctic, you're north of 80 degrees latitude or 85, it's more like 7 or 8 times faster than the global average. So the numbers also from weather stations in the US, of course, it's not like scientists don't know that, as urban development occurs around a weather station, that's going to give a temperature bias to the high side. So they correct for that. They take great care in these thousands and thousands of weather stations, to correct for any bias, to make sure they're giving accurate numbers. So maybe Mr. Heartland can understand that and talk about that next time. So basically, we're warming at much greater rates. And I just saw a study that looked at the last 10 years of temperature. And the global average temperature, if relative to the 1750 baseline for the last 10 years, is about 1.35 or so. 1.37, I think, was the number. So I'll talk about that. I do lots of videos. I'll talk about that in a video shortly. So we're not, if you look at so we're going to pass 1.5. We passed it in a single year in 2020. Okay, we're 1.37 for the last decade. So in a short number of years, we're going to have long-term decadal or 4 or 5 year averages over the 1.5, and we're rapidly heading up to 2. In fact, if you look at a few individual months in 2020, I think February 2020, March 2020, those average temperatures for those months were 1.85 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial if you just take the monthly average. So we're above 1.5 for the year, and we're rapidly approaching 2. So that message, that's just the reality of the situation. So anytime somebody gives you a number for temperature rise, always check the baseline. And just remember, it's not that difficult. If you see a baseline of 1950 to 1980, then to go back to the 1900 baseline, you need to add 0.2. And then, of course, to go back from the 1900 to the 1750, you need to add 0.3. So always do that simple conversion when you see a number and say, well, wait a minute, you're comparing it to 2. That's absurd. That's ridiculous. But use the proper baseline. Okay, so I just like to say that. And also, it's pretty clear that the temperature distribution on the planet is out of whack, shall we say. And just remember the fundamentals of what the jet stream is, how the jet stream guides storms, how the jet stream kind of acts as a wall between cold, dry Arctic air and warm, humid air from the equator. So when the jet stream gets more and more wavy, as it is, you get troughs going far down, bringing cold air to very, very low latitude. And you get ridges of the jet stream going to very far north, in fact, going right up to the North Pole in the dead of winter in some cases. And the jet stream also gets stuck in place. And this is why, you know, we're getting tremendous extreme weather events around the planet. They're increasing in frequency, severity, and duration because the jet streams are slowing down and becoming and extremely wavy. And as a result, these weather patterns we're getting are extreme. You know, because storms, like think of cumulus cloud formations, you know, mesoscale complex or something like, or a train of thunderstorms. You know, they used to be swept along fairly quickly by a fast jet stream, and now because the jet stream slowed, they're moving more slowly. So they tend to linger over places and not reach other places. The places they don't reach are in drought, and the places they linger over, you get torrential rains and flooding and landslides and all of this infrastructure damage. And also the ability to grow food, of course, depends on the temperature and precipitation regime of a region. And if that completely changes, then our ability to grow food in that region is threatened. And in the short term, that is going to be the significant thing that affects all of us on the planet. You know, global food reduction of supply, and therefore prices spiking, and you know, chaos, geopolitical chaos. So just keep those things in mind. We're basically out of time. We're dealing with all of these consequences, and I'll just refer people to my website, paulbeckwith.net, and I've done over 1,000 videos now. So WTEF, World Trade Talent Economic Forum 200 is great, but you know, you gotta speed it up to catch up to what I've done. Although I've been doing it for many years, and I do 15-minute videos as opposed
Okay.
to 1 or 2 hour videos. But you're doing a great job, Sharif. I just thought I'd give a little joke plug there. You know, keep at it.
Definitely, we will share your content. Anybody, those who join in World Talent Economy Forum, we are very much open. We love to share your business, your organization, your NGO, and your activities, your blog, anything you can share with our audience. And we will happy to share all of your work with our millions of students. Already we are starting to develop a like a department in universities in Malaysia. It's a heart in Kuala Lumpur, and hopefully you will get a lot of access with this different cultural youth community. We have our friends Alex, as well as our senior friends, Mr. Lynn Shifford. So how do you want to introduce this climate change issue, Mr. Lynn Shifford, with our speakers? And then I will come to Mr. Alex, and I love to learn more that how we become good climate activists like you. Yes. Mr. Lynn.
So climate change is not my area, as you probably well know. Not involved with the 7 businesses that I'm involved with. But I will say this: when I was growing up as a kid, I used to be able to ice, and I live probably 3 miles from where I grew up. I used to ice skate from probably sometime a little after Thanksgiving until the middle of March. Interestingly enough, this past weekend was the first time I've actually seen a pond frozen enough around here that anybody could ice skate on. So I think clearly we're having climate change. Our weather in our area, in 1998, we had a very significant, and I live in the suburban Philadelphia area. We had a very significant tornado that went through the area, and you know, I can't picture those kinds of things happening when I was growing up. So listening to Paul talk here, I was fascinated to hear how the jet stream can affect what's happening and the variations in climate change. Hadn't learned anything. That's one of the things I like to do, is to get on some of these shows, because I'm a lifelong learner. So I'm happy to learn what you folks have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Lin. Mr. Alex, how we become a great climate activists like you, and how we can train our youth communities about this point.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My mic's on. Cool. Thank you for joining us, Lynn. I just want to mention to Lynn, you came a few minutes late, and uh, you heard Edward speak, and it upset a lot of us. And we might not even be expressing how upset we are. We basically had a climate denier on the show that was spreading misinformation on this platform, and it bothers me and frustrates me because I have done search and rescue. I have done body recovery after major superstorms. I have seen suffering around the world and food shortages and water shortages. And I want to thank Laurent for stepping in shortly after and just correcting some of this misinformation. And then Donald came in and corrected the misinformation. And then Paul did from a scientific perspective. And this was just so important. And out of this show, on this panel, I just again, I really value that Paul took the time from his day to explain climate change and to define what climate change is from a scientific standpoint. So it was frustrating. So Edward came on, and there's millions of people like him that are continuing to spread misinformation and disinformation, just like Laurent mentioned, and it's just damaging to our society. It's not just spreading misinformation; it just confuses people, and it causes just confusion. So he did mention a good point with greenwashing. There is greenwashing around the world, but then he was saying that renewable energies aren't a solution, or there's just a lot of bad things about renewable energies, and that's just confusing people. So we are going through one of the largest threats. This is the largest threat known to mankind, not just in human history. This is like the largest threat to our human existence. And there is going to be a lot of disruptions from severe weather events like Laurent mentioned. There's going to be food shortages, water shortages. There's going to be disruptions in the supply chain. There's going to be larger superstorms, and there's just going to be a lot of suffering. So we don't have time for these discussions and debates on that anymore. It's like, again, Donald mentioned the scientific consensus used to be 97%, and now what was just mentioned, it's like 99% or 100%. We just don't have time. We're out of time. We have to start implementing solutions right away because we just have too much to risk. So the Heartland Institute was mentioned, and that platform is just known for the misinformation. And for me personally, it just kind of like made me like embarrassed to be on this show, having someone spreading misinformation like that, because there may be people on this show that watched the first few minutes and then they sign off, and that's what they took for the day, and that's what they're thinking about. And it's just, that was really concerning. So I do want to say thank you, Viva, for being on the show. That was really cool how she was talking about nature-based solutions. I haven't heard that term very often, and that's a cool cool concept that we do have to work towards more nature-based solutions. So I'm happy that she brought that into the conversation. And yeah, thank you for joining us for your first time on the show. So
I'd like to add something to what you're saying about the confusion. I think with the people that are already well understood and behind climate change need to understand our experience as a company trying to gain traction and scale up. We have found that the biggest weakness is from the top down, and it's the politicians and the elected leaders that need to be focused on. So basically, your students that are watching would be well advised to focus on community and public leadership and advise them of their opinion and understanding of climate change. And that way you'll automatically remove the deniers from the discussion when you're engaging the politicians. And if we can do that, I think you actually can see a lot of positive come out of that. I had a letter written to Prime Minister Trudeau on Christmas Eve about our technology and also about giving a mandate to the Canadian government to fight climate change. And not 2 weeks later, Prime Minister Trudeau added a mandate letter update to his entire cabinet, so we can have an impact. The other thing that happened from that letter was Jagmeet Singh, the NDP opposition leader, has written that he believes that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank should be called the Public Climate Bank and changed to that mandate, so we can have an impact. But you just need to be focused about what you want and what you're asking for. So this is a way that you can remove the denial conversation from the table. So I just want to share that.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Besides that, I want to add one point. What do you think? Example, if there is anyone who is a denier of climate change, as well as, is it our job that we have to like convince them this point in a positive way, and we have
Yes,
to take the
teach them to go
okay.
further, to read more, to take in more information, and to watch what's going on and listen to credible sources. Cite
No.
credible sources.
Yes, like I know, like Mr. Lin, he is a successful businessman. He has 7 different organizations, but he is not too much of aware about climate change. But we have to add him, right? We have to convince him. We have to know, like, help him to understand about climate change. I'm sure there are many business organizations like him. So if we think that okay, we will deny this, like this kind of peoples, and they will not work with us and they are our opposition, then what will happen? Maybe we have chance to engage 20 different corporations or organizations. By this way, maybe we are losing our positions. I don't know, it's my observation. But Mr. Lin, you are very experienced guy and you
Well,
have different corporations. How do you think about this sustainability, climate change, and what should we do? What do you want to
Sharif,
share with
you
us?
don't have to. Nobody has to convince me. I'm
Okay.
probably the oldest person here, and I've seen enough of it, so I understand what's going on. Um, and
Exactly.
and um, and I've seen it happen too much. So we need to do something to change. Um, I guess what did somebody
Mhm.
say? If you keep making the same mistakes, you're just going to keep doing the same thing. Or no, if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep making the same mistakes. So we have to stop doing that, and we have to really change what we're doing and focus on the fact that my grandkids and maybe
Mhm.
I'll live long enough to have great grandkids because I have 2 grandsons who are old enough to do that. But the fact of the matter is, maybe my great grandkids will see a world that's totally different than it is today. And I think we need to impress upon the people that we need to reverse what we've been doing to the world. But that's my own perspective. I am a believer.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. Professor Dave and Professor Donald and Mr. Paul, like, how do we can add more companies and universities, uh, uh, and we can like add with more strategic way this kind of corporations, those who can help us to understand these climate change issues, and we can grow better ecosystem.
Well, one thing, more and more corporations are starting to realize that it's part of their best interests to uh, deal with the climate change because it's affecting them too. In fact, I have some papers that I can put some links to that are quite old, like 15 years old, where the U.S. military goes through and they talk about the consequences of climate change to them, and they're talking about how they're going to have to move their military bases. They talk about the global disruption, the wars that are going to be happening. So that, ironically, even though uh, he who he who shall not be named, who's gone now, was a climate change denier, the the U.S. military has been preparing for climate change Now, the reason I said that is because if you look at corporations, more and more corporations are getting involved in it. And I think that if you reached out, Sharish, you might be able to find the part of various organizations, even ones that we love to hate. I mean, one of the most, one that gives just a visceral dislike is Monsanto. But I personally am a very, very big fan of GMOs. I think they're wonderful. And for instance, the coronavirus vaccines, the most effective ones are GMOs. So GMOs have been being used to create new drugs. Or make insulin cheaper, all kinds of different things. They're fabulous. And that's one way that we can have crops that can adapt to the world. So you might want to look at their website, and they have a whole section about climate change there and the effects of climate change. There's quite a lot of information. But Coca-Cola, Nestle's, all of these corporations are now starting to deal with it. But it's something that Alex says a lot is vote with your money. And you can look at the corporations. ExxonMobil basically is one of the main funders of the Heartland Institute. And so if there's any possible way that you can stop using less fossil fuels and tell the corporations that that's what you're doing, make sure that they understand. It's interesting because British Petroleum stopped calling themselves, they changed their name to BP to get the petroleum out of it. Now they call themselves an energy company, and they're funding a lot of renewables because they know that's what the future is. And if they want to stay in business, they're going to have to change the leopard's going to have to change its spots. And so awareness is the thing. And I want to say one other thing. If you meet a climate change denier, you will never be able to change their mind with facts. Because what winds up happening is that they then distrust you more and more and more because it goes against the beliefs that they have. And so when you give them facts, and it's kind of counterproductive because then they start saying, well, nature, science, nature, climate change, all these absolute top journals must be lying. And so then they start distrusting the actual good sources of information. So one of the I just read an article in, I think, the Washington Post a couple of days ago about how we need to learn to ask them what and get their motivations. So there's this technique called motivational interviewing. You can look it up. And it's a matter of basically asking people like, okay, well, so you believe that this is true. How does that affect you in your life? I mean, how does knowing that, what are you going to do because you know this? And you just keep asking them certain questions about it. And you can find the place where they have doubts. And then once you get to the place where they have doubts, you're going to be able to start having a real discussion with them because it gets them to the point where you can start talking to them. And that's on an individual level. But Alex keeps saying, vote with your money, vote with your money. And that's, and to vote with your money, I don't have a car. I walk everywhere. I haven't. And I think that people have to become more conscious, and I agree about the governments. Vote with your, in democracies, vote with your vote, and don't ever vote in anybody.
And communicate with them directly. Direct communication is very important.
That's a wonderful idea.
Yes.
In fact, I needed to had something that was concerned, and I wanted to talk to my congresswoman, and she was just delightful. She, set up an appointment. I could walk right in there and talk to her. We have to understand. Everybody has to understand that governments exist because we agree that they exist. They're us. They're not separate from us. We make them. We create them with our actions and our beliefs, and so people get this whole idea is that government's over there and they do what they do and we don't have any influence. And that's just, it's just not the way it is. The way it
We
is
have to create the
are them.
conversation.
Right.
Create the conversation.
And create the government. So,
Mhm.
I mean, it's a funny thing to say, but really, where you can't touch, see, feel a government. I mean, they're not. It isn't a concrete thing. It's something that we collectively create with our beliefs and our actions. And so it is us. So we can change it, and we can make a difference. Okay.
Going back to the question that was asked a moment ago, I think there's something that's happening that is going to be earth-shaking that we haven't paid any attention to, and that is that the insurance industry has decided to pull the plug on fossil fuels, and that means that if you are mining or extracting or refining or distributing fossil fuels, the insurance companies now are going to pull the plug on you. They're not going to be able to insure you. If you can't get something insured, you can't do it in our society. So that's going to be a huge reckoning for a lot of industries. And it hasn't gotten much publicity. I just kind of noticed it the other day. I think it was in Climate Crocs. And so I put it in the chat. But that's going to make a big difference in terms of attitudes of industry and of government towards the things that we're talking about. Because if you can't get it insured, you can't do it. So it's a roundabout way to get control over polluting industries now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Paul.
Yes, I'm very interested in hearing a bit more from Viva about reduction technology. I mean, the hydroxide radical, it's OH minus. So if you have water to pull off a
it's
hydrogen,
it's the radical is an excited molecule. It doesn't always have a negative charge, but
yes.
it does have extra energy. Yeah.
Right. So it's the purifier of the atmosphere. Like
it's known in peer-reviewed science as the main universal oxidant for pollutants and greenhouse gases.
Yes, so it does react with methane and breaks down methane into CO2 and water. I mean, how are you going to first? Just a few more details. So you're producing the radical, you're putting it up into the air. You know, at what altitudes and what are you trying to accomplish with your technique? Because it's quite interesting, and the OA the levels, the natural levels in the atmosphere vary significantly for this.
They do.
Obviously, where there's a lot more water vapor, you can get a lot more of this radical. So in the high Arctic, for example, which is very dry, very low levels of water, you'll have very low levels of this radical, and therefore the methane lifetime, you know, methane in the Arctic, for example, will be much longer lived. It won't be broken down in the atmosphere above the Arctic. It's only when it circulates to lower latitudes that it will be broken down. So maybe you can talk about your plans as to where you will deploy your units, what altitudes, what latitudes, etc., and what you're hoping to accomplish. Because most people here, I doubt, they don't know about. I mean, I didn't know about your company or what you're trying to do until you came on this show today. So please explain a bit more about your techniques.
Okay, will do. I'm located in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada, which has a latitude of about 60 degrees. So we're under the relatively high part of the troposphere. So hydroxyl itself is lighter than air. So we're planning a ground-based deployment into the atmosphere, into the surrounding airshed area of Kamloops with permissions, which we're working on right now. And because it lofts up into the troposphere and mixes, we're going to work with the general circulation model of the planet, which is about a 2 to 3 week time cycle for emissions to mix into the atmosphere. And if it's gradually released in a concentrated stream, it will oxidize both criteria air pollutants that are not greenhouse gases and also the greenhouse gases that we know, the refrigerant gases, methane. It will reduce ozone levels in the troposphere. So in a large scale up of our technology, which we're working on with United Nations Clean Development Mechanism right now, explaining the data parameters that we'll monitor, we'll even be monitoring the plume all the way up to the stratosphere so that we make sure we're not intruding in on that and that we have a steady mixing from the ground platform. And the basis on which we rely for greenhouse gas removal is called apportionment. So hydroxyl is known to be an indiscriminate reactant that is universal. So if you know all the pollutant levels, it reacts with all of them as it encounters them, and it doesn't react with anything else. You can apportion it and come up with a calculation to know how many CO2 equivalents of the greenhouse gases are being removed. And we have all of those numbers before two regulatory bodies, and one of them is the Canadian Standards Association, which we're planning right now. What we're doing is looking for a junior loan to get the CSA certification for that, and also status as a designated operational entity with the Clean Development Mechanism of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. So they will work with us to make sure that when we deliver the hydroxyl, all the parameters that we have are peer reviewed and fall within understandable frameworks of measuring both by numerical satellite and ground measurements for all the levels. And one of the things that we're watching closely is the methane levels as the Arctic loses more methane and the whole methane deposits destabilize. And we work on educating the governments because we think that they're going to have to step in on behalf of the taxpayer and the businesses to organize what we think is the best thing, which is dedicated committees, hopefully at the COP26 level, and maybe at the April 22nd conference with John Kerry and Joe Biden, to have a technology vetting program and committee that starts to look at actual technology and vetting it so that we bring the best technology forward for society and humanity. Now, we're not saying that there should be only one technology, but we think that if the politicians and the leadership go through a vetting process, it will clarify the focus on what needs to be done. And because the ongoing climate damages are costing more and more lives, money, and infrastructure, we think that they should really address the technology issue as quickly as possible. So that's the overall. It is a ground-based deployment.
Okay, now the the hydroxyl, if you created it in low concentrations in indoor environments, I know it would remove something like tobacco smoke. Do you think?
Yes, it's already FDA approved for indoor use by a company actually based in Kelowna, British Columbia, and they use it to deodorize spaces that have had some kind of disaster where they still need to have people working while they clean the air. So it's already FDA approved for indoor use.
Do you think it would have any effect on reducing virus concentrations in indoor air?
I have actually proposed to the government that large gathering spaces could have the hydroxyl dispersal system in their HVAC systems, and they didn't want to support it because they felt that there was too much research for them to support. But we will go back to them with that. It is 99.9% virus, mold, and bacteria removal. That's already established science. Yeah.
Can you put something in the chat about hydroxyl radicals so that we can learn about it from the kindergarten level up?
You can actually, I have a couple of YouTube videos on the reductiontech.com website about the hydroxyl radical, but if you just type it into a search engine, you can get information that, that will lead you at your level to what you think you can absorb about it. It's widely known in atmospheric chemistry circles to be the universal sink for pollutants. So something that we're teaching governments is that the atmosphere is a natural sewer system, and thereby that definition means that infrastructure is a government responsibility, that they need to look at it because it's actually an exquisite sewer.
Okay. Do you have any questions to Madam Viva? Otherwise, I want to give chance to Mr. Laurent.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Mr. Paul? Okay, Mr. Laurent, yes.
Yeah. All right, so Donald mentioned skeptical science, and I just want to add that, well, skeptical science is a very good website, especially like if you're unsure about the science of climate change. They basically give a long list of arguments by skeptics. So like, for instance, they have an argument that says it's the sun that's causing climate change, or climate change before. And basically they have like a response in terms of science to each argument. And yeah, so I think skeptical science is a very good resource.
But their name is terrible, right? Most people most people see the name and they think it's a denier site.
Yeah.
Where it's a perfect, it's the exact opposite. So I've told them for many years, just come up with a decent name, right? It's it's really they could do much better. It's unfortunate, but they branded that for so many years. I don't think they're going to do that, but it's an excellent website. They have all different levels of analysis too. You can go on, like when you have a denier statement, they'll go at the very basic for somebody who understands no science, and then they'll go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you can select a different level of the response that you get. But it's very, very, it's fantastic site. Yeah.
Yes. So they have like a basic level, intermediate level, and advanced level. And advanced level is like they have a lot of the intense science. So yeah, it's a very good resource. Another good resource is also Climate Reality. So Climate Reality is an organization founded by Al Gore, and they also have a lot of information. I'm a member of Climate Reality. I do presentations using slides from Climate Reality. So
when
that's
is
another
the next
good resource.
session? Last year with the virus lockdowns, they had a couple online sessions. Normally they have 2 sessions a year in different countries, and you get several thousand people attending. But online, I think they had record numbers last year. So my question is when is the next online session? Because if you haven't taken it, I want to attend. I want to attend a weekend training session. Maybe moderate or teach eventually, but get involved with the organization. At least get access to the slides. So I heard that on their website they were going to post some details in early February. I haven't seen anything yet, but I highly recommend, if you haven't done the training, whatever level of knowledge you have, do it, because it'll give you access to huge resources in terms of slides and so on. So there should be an online session coming up within the next few months, I would imagine. Is that?
I think in last summer they had a session in, I think, July and August. I went to the one in August, and I have a feeling they're gonna have one in the summer probably. but it
Right.
hasn't been announced yet. But just to say, the trainings are free. You don't have to pay for it. And
Dave,
and
you
it,
did the
and it,
training too, right?
I did a training in 2013 and
Yeah, I did the
2020.
training.
Right, cool.
I did the training in 2007 in January. It was the fifth class that Mr. Gore had conducted. And it was a wake-up call, but it was also cautionary because what I got out of it was, here's how bad it's going to be if we do everything wrong. And my approach, because I work with kids and families, is here's how great it's going to be when we do everything right. So we have to get beyond awareness, which is where I'm afraid that the whole project leaves you, is now you're aware that there's a problem. But you've got to be interested enough in that problem that you're going to start taking steps towards solution. And then you have to try something. And if it works, then you have to reinforce that trial with an evaluation, and then try something else and try something else. And eventually you become an adopter of what we might call a low carbon lifestyle. And then through confirmation from the community, you become an advocate. But many of us jumped from awareness to advocacy, and we didn't go through the steps of being interested in trying something and evaluating it and adopting it and then confirming it and then becoming advocates. So we have trouble understanding why people don't just jump from awareness to advocacy. But the way that people generally change their minds and attitudes is they go up that staircase from awareness to interest to trial to evaluation to adoption to confirmation and then to advocacy. So we have to be patient with the people who have not jumped on board because they don't have that same ability to go all the way from awareness to advocacy without all the intermediate steps. And so my job is to get people to start taking little baby steps and work their way up that ladder, because most people are not going to do what we did. I think everybody on this call became an advocate. And why did we become an advocate? Because we were aware. Well, most people won't make that leap. So we've got to take them gently by the hand. And that's what our Green Actioneers program does. We take an entire school of all the elementary school kids and their teachers and their parents. And in a single day, we take that entire school from awareness to advocacy. And until we can do that throughout the culture, we're going to have to be fighting against this denier complex. And I think that we have to realize that it's easier to work with the people who are innovators or early adopters who are ready to make a change than it is to work with the laggards or the deniers, because the laggards and deniers are not going to come on board, and we don't need them. What we need to do.
Okay, so Dave, here's some homework for you for your next edition of the book. Get a list of all of the professions in society, like your plumber, your electrician, and come up with some simple things but effective things that person could do in their particular profession to make the biggest impact on climate change. So, for example, a plumber. Okay, it might be insulating all of the pipes. Anytime you're in a job, just insulate the hot water pipe. You can get the rolls of the foam and cover the pipe. You're in the guts of the house doing the plumbing anyway. That would be and say, okay, this would cost X and it would save the family Y over the next 10 years of ownership of their house or whatever. Or an electrician, or the thing is the best action that a person can take to address climate change depends on that individual person's skills and their knowledge, and you want to parlay their existing knowledge and skills into doing something simple that can make a huge difference. And if you have some sort of training document for adults where you look at, just get a list of every profession and think of the biggest impact, one or two things that person in that profession could do, and publish that can be your next education training. And it fits in with the kids too, because the kids are all wondering, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? So if a kid's interested in a certain thing, you can say, aha, here's the biggest impact that profession could make on climate. Anyway, that's some homework for you. You can report on it in a couple of weeks or something.
I'll let you know how it turns out. That's a good next book.
I'll buy the book.
Yes. One specific point I just want to know, like as you are activist and you are doing a lot of work as an advocate, 2 point. Number one, ecosystem is important. I believe that when we develop a system, we need governments, we need corporations, we need academy, and need NGOs and many organizations actually playing roles. Uh, Even for the climate change, this is also true. So in that situation, how we can develop better ecosystem? And when you discussing about training and developments, we also concern about training and development at these points. So what type of training actually help our youth community? I want to say, like from the kids to around 25 to 26 years old. What your advice? I want to start with Mr. Paul, then Professor Donald, Mr. Dave, Madam Viva, Alex, and Laurent. Who want to come first? Mr.
Yeah,
Paul?
I think I don't know. Climate seems to be an afterthought in school training. Whether you're talking about the elementary level or even high school. I mean, you can't take. There should be a climate change course in elementary school. There should be or a nature course in elementary school. There should be the same sort of thing in a high school. And I'm a big advocate for being outside, being in touch with nature, trees and forests and lakes and things. So, I think it's very important for kids to have field trips. If you're in an urban school, get on a bus, once a month or whatever, and you go out into the country somewhere, and the course is actually, you look at trees, you pick up leaves, you measure the widths of trees, and how much how deep the soil is, and you do nature training and try to get people back more in touch with nature and their environment, and that can be done across the board, right? And also you have to keep schools. You have to have some government intervention when powerful corporations try to get in the curriculum of schools. I think this happens a lot in the US. I'm not sure about other countries, but a big corporation may fund, they may provide large donations to a school board, in order to get part of their information, say from Heartland or wherever else, into the school system. And, this is a problem when schools are underfunded by governments and they're vulnerable to being attacked. I call it an attack by corporate interests who want to start spreading misinformation at the very beginning level of education.
They change the child's narratives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, kids, they like nothing better than running around outside, getting dirty, getting, in nature. So, in some countries, they started looking at outdoor, schoolyard, like having some lessons actually being taught in the forest, for example. The kids are all sitting around on logs and the teacher's there talking to them all. And those are things that they will remember for the rest of their lives, those sort of classes, so a different way of teaching, I guess.
Yeah, and also more stories from children that have been affected by climate impacts and disasters being highlighted to other children, having a conversation across the youth platform about kids in climate affected areas and how it's affected their lives, being shared with kids in developed countries so that they have that empathy, and they also will come to the climate awareness faster because they would start thinking, well, what if that was me? What if that happened to me? And a lot of the people that I've seen that come out of climate denial, the triggering event was something that impacted their lives, that woke them up.
Well, that's why the way that we work with young children is we do an immersive education. It's all experiential. I only have them for 30 minutes, but in that 30 minutes, I turn them into butterflies. I turn them into frogs. I turn them into manatees. I turn them into sea turtles, and they get to play a game and they get to be immersed in it. And even a child who has never seen bees or coral, they can become a bee. They can buzz around the play, and they can learn what the problems are, why bees are having a problem. And in order to change curriculum, curriculum is like a glacier. And what we have to do is go in and just nip around the edges of it. And that's what I do. I've never tried to work with a school district or with a director of education or a school board. I work with a principal in the school and the Parent Teachers Association president, because they have impact on what's going to happen this week, this month, this year. But if you want to look at curriculum, oh my goodness, it's the most difficult thing to change. It's terribly political. And a lot of our curriculum in the United States comes out of the state of Texas for some reason. They've created a lot of the textbooks, and so the textbooks dictate the curriculum. So it's better to try to work school by school and get the ethos of the school to change. And you do that through the principal and through the teachers and through people who are actually there on the ground, rather than trying to work at the top and work it down. It doesn't seem to work that way. But I can be faulted for not having taken the next step, which is to then, once we have it working at a school, to go to that district and say to that district, come look at that school. This school is the one that is doing it right. Please help the other schools to do it right. And instead, I just tend to be like the bee going from flower to flower. I go from school to school, and I don't go back and look at what the end product is. And that's in our next iteration of this program, which is going to start in the fall of 2021, when we can go back to school again. Then we're going to be very cognizant of the what we leave behind, and making sure that if there are 2 or 3 schools in a district that have had our program, that they get together and they affect the curriculum so that we don't have to come back, because we can't keep going back to the same schools over and over again.
Right. I mean, do you have any hope that the Biden administration can will work on changing the curriculum?
Of course, I had that same hope. I started this program at the beginning of the Obama administration, assuming that it would take off. And what happened was that changed after only 2 years. Our Congress changed, the House of Representatives changed, and all of the good things that were intended with regard to climate got washed away. So it's really important now in this era, the new era, to get in quick. Luckily, our Congressman, Darren Soto, who is from Central Florida, when I went in to talk to him about the ideas that Citizens Climate Lobby are pushing to have a carbon tax and dividend, he said, "Oh, I know all about that," and he told me all about it, and he's right. He knew about it. He knew more about it than I did. So there are some people in our government who are ready to make a move, and we just have to give them permission. And
we have to talk to them. We have to talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Yes, but Mr. Alex and Lauren, as you are young and you have different kind of experience, how we can train our youth community? What your opinion you want to share with our audience, Mr. Alex and Mr. Lauren? Mr. Alex.
Yes, so I'd like to say that I have been fortunate that I've now spoken in front of 27 middle school, high school, and college classes for approximately 1 hour each class. They're all listed on my website, the date and time and location, different places around the United States. And my website's advanceddisasterrelief.com. So I have had that opportunity. Most of those subjects was on journalism, international journalism, covering disasters around the world. Some of those topics, like I think it was South Carolina when I was there, I went to the college and then they looked at my background, my experience, my website, my training, all of that, and they actually like set me up with like 5 or 7 classes. It was a lot. So they just kept putting me in different classrooms to speak. They even gave me this whole classroom, and a lot of people showed up and they got like extra credit to listen to me speak for an hour or two. It was really cool. So, but not all community colleges, middle schools, and high schools are that understanding that they don't want this information. And I've just found it really difficult. I've personally gone to so many different colleges and high schools, personally, go in and ask to speak to the principal and the the employees, the front desk, and they're always like, oh, send us an email. Oh yeah, sure, climate change, send us an email. And I'm like, you guys, I'm right here right now because I've traveled around the world. Like, please just get me in a class, get me speaking. This is an emergency. We're passing the point of no return. And they haven't taken it seriously. And I hope as we start to see more disasters around the world, everyone's going to start taking it more seriously. So I commend Dave for, doing all that difficult work, doing the emails and the footwork and getting turned down and being, perseverant and continuing. Paula, which I think owns Santa Cruz Climate Action Network, here in Santa Cruz, it's a major nonprofit. She's working with a lot of schools to get educational material. It's just there's so much bureaucracy and red tape and all these rules and stuff. It's just really difficult. So
I have the solution if you'll give me a moment on this. This is really the key to the kingdom. Every year, all of the principals from all of the schools get together at the annual principals convention. And every year, all the PTA...
I'm going to that. You guys, climate change.
all the PTA leaders get together at the PTA convention. So you get a booth, get a table,
yeah.
You have a display, and you have literature. And then when they come by, you act in a professional manner towards them. It helps if you have a book. And that's why I have all these books. I've been in over 2,000 schools with programs.
Keep printing.
And the way you get in is you go to their PTA convention, you go to the principals convention, and if the PTA president and the principal want you, you're in. You don't have to talk to the district. You don't have to go make a big deal out of it. You just go talk to them at their conventions. Get a table, pay for a table, make a display.
I'll see you at the next PTA convention for sure. I actually have a book too. Paul has like 20 books.
You have to look professional. You have to look like somebody they want at their school. You can't go in there and go, I want to come to your school because it's really important. The world is gonna, No, you go in and you get very professional with them, and it works. And I did 2,000 schools with a juggling program. If as inconsequential as juggling is, just think how consequential climate change is. So when I go into climate change education, they're very, and you know what? They pay me to go. So I'm part of the.
Yeah, I got paid about half the time.
Yeah, the edutainment, they have an edutainment budget. And so if you're both educational and entertaining, but you got to work on the entertaining part so that they go, oh yeah, that guy, we want him in our school. So you always start out with something entertaining.
So you can juggle. I can juggle 2 balls.
Okay, well,
You can juggle one.
3. It doesn't have to be juggling. But if you're going to work with kids between K and 8, which is where my heart lies, is with the K-8 kids. If you're going to work with them and with their parents and with their teachers, then you've got to be a storyteller, and you've got to be entertaining, and you've got to make it fun, and you've got to have interaction, and you've got to make it something that they're going to remember, that they're going to talk about over dinner later that night. And that's the important part, is to get into, not make it dry at all. We don't do
good
any
narrative. A good narrative. Yeah. The narrative of the children. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but Mr. Laurent and Professor Donalds, like Mr. Laurent.
So one thing that young people, your original question, I think, was how young people could get involved, right? That was the original question. Yeah, yeah. So
Yes,
one good way
yes.
is to So one good way is to do the training in climate reality. They take young people as well. So I'm not sure what the age limit is, but young people could apply. And there's probably going to be, like I said before, there's probably going to be like 2 trainings in the summer. Well, they haven't announced it yet, but that's what they did last year. Um, so that's the one way to get involved. But I think also to go even more intense, I think that we can get the laws to change to force climate education in elementary and high schools. If you can get a law that basically uh, teaches kids about climate change in high school, elementary school, that could have a very big impact in the future, and also it will inoculate them from getting prone to disinformation when they're older.
Right.
Because
Good
if
point.
people learn at a young age about climate change, they're not going to listen as much to the climate change deniers. So that's one way we can do it. Uh, but I think the news and media in general should talk about climate change more often as well. So we need to find some kind of way to get the news media to talk about climate change on a more regular basis. And and in general, we just need to have more awareness. I think that once we have more awareness, more people will vote for politicians that take climate change seriously, and then action will be taken. So I think the key to it is spreading awareness, and that's my opinion.
Yeah, and some
Thank you,
basic
Professor Donald.
education about Earth system science, which Paul, of course, is very good at, and introductory level, grade 10 level information about the Earth system would be very helpful as well. Yeah.
Blake?
Thank you. Professor Donald, what do you want to add in terms of training?
I'm going to go back to something that I said before. I'm very interested in science and the philosophy of science, and I teach, I write about that. And so one of the things that is important for people to understand is, or to learn, is what science is and what scientists basically do. And I think it's an incredibly valuable skill for everything in your life, because in science, we don't say things are absolutely true. We never do, because ultimately we know that whatever we know, we could develop better instruments, we could learn more, we could come up with different theories and refine what we do. So science is about learning continually. So if you have some of that knowledge, when the Heartland guy came up and he said, oh, the IPCC made this prediction, and then 5 years later they made a different prediction, you're like, yeah, well, duh, that's what science does. We learn more, and we change. When the facts change, we change our mind. We're not. It's not like some sort of book that tells absolute truth. So how do people learn that? I mean, so all of the things that everybody's been talking about learning Earth systems and learning I think basic physics to be able to understand. You could do a experiment with kids where you showed them when you put with a thermometer, when you put more CO2 in an aquarium or some sort of closed thing, that lo and behold, put it out in the sun, the one that has more CO2 gets hotter than the one that doesn't. I mean, it's physics. It's not something that you can argue about. It's the way things work from experimental evidence and observation. So I think the other thing that I think is really important is, and has been really lost in America, and I don't know if it's the United States, I don't know if it's true in every country, but people are not taught the fundamental basis of what governments are. In one sense, governments are a way for us to collectively do things that we can't really do as individuals. There's no company is going to have make money building roads. for an instance, and privatizing roads. And it wouldn't be, if they did, it would be extremely unfair, because what they do is they build the roads in places where they could make the most money, and then they wouldn't build roads in other places. I mean, that happened in the United States. Our telephone system was developed in a way that required the telephone companies to provide service even out in the middle of nowhere, which they wouldn't have done because there's no money in it. And so you have to have you have to have regulations, you have to have some sort of a way of enforcing those things, and that's what governments do. So I put a link in the chat box there for an organization called Government is Good. And it explains what the benefits of government and how, and it just huge list. You look at that and you go, huh, what could I have been thinking? And so the deniers, one of their techniques is, it's not just for climate denial, is to cause you to question the sources, and they're extremely hateful towards government. They say, you know, as Ronald Reagan said, government isn't the solution, it's the problem. And so they try to undermine everything that that they're doing. And two of you have mentioned that, wow, I went and talked to my congressman and he knew more about carbon taxes than I did. And
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and she's been going on, you know, often go talk to your congressman, go talk to your people. But if people don't understand that, and all that they hear is that the government is this evil thing that's trying to get you and blah, blah, blah like that, then they're not going to do that. And so that's important. And then the other thing I think that somebody else brought up is about the textbooks. And school boards do listen when you show up at their meetings and yell at and holler at them. They have times where there's open things where you can go in and actually talk to them. And it's so insidious that in the South, the textbooks that they use about the Civil War in the United States, which was a war because some of the states wanted to maintain slavery and other states did not, they don't mention slavery. They say it was basically a war where the South was trying to get some tariffs removed, and the North didn't like it, so they attacked them. I mean, they literally have absolute misinformation in textbooks. So as a parent or as a person, you should look at your kids' textbooks. I mean, you should take the time to see what stuff is being fed to your kids. And
Good point. Right.
Yeah, I mean, these textbooks sometimes are just complete misinformation. They're sources of misinformation. And if you're just think about it, you know, if you put your kid in a situation where they're being fed truth by the Heartland Institute and you know, all these various organizations, that you're doing a very terrible thing to them. And so, I mean, you have to have it in your own self to protect your family and your world and the people around you. And so each of us needs to have awareness on levels that aren't immediately obvious. We need to understand what sources of information people are getting right now, because it's insidious, it's dangerous, and it's happening. So open yourself up to what kinds of things that people are getting and find out. Okay, that's what I'm going to say now. Get your kids accurate information.
Looks like we lost Sharif. So Donald, you mentioned cognitive dissonance in the past, and that's another key word that we're hearing more throughout the news and social media. So anyone that's watching, I would definitely recommend researching and learning more about that term, because that is why it makes it really difficult to get information to climate deniers and people spreading misinformation. That was you, Donald, right? That mentioned that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. it is a competition for ideas. So it's really important to play as fair as possible, for sure.
So I guess I could I have some notes that I'd like to cover. So earlier in this conversation, Paul could probably second me. Edward was mentioning the testing facilities near cities and where scientists are collecting data. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, that he mentioned, one of their testing facilities, I think, is on like the very peak of like Maui, and they put it at that location because it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so it wouldn't be impacted by any nearby cities. And that actually checks the parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And I believe that is one of the testing sites that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has got a lot of their based a lot of their graphs and their statistics. And again, anyone watching this or anyone in this discussion, I would recommend going into Google. I've sent this image to Sharif a few times. He's brought it up on screen. I would Google type IPCC, which stands for International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, and then parts per million, or just ppm, and then graph. So you can do IPCC, ppm, graph, and it'll show this chart where it shows the threshold. If we're in between a certain range of parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we're projected to reach a certain degree in increases in global temperatures. If we're at a higher threshold of parts per million of greenhouse gases, then we're going to reach much higher temperatures. So that is really dependent on the choices we're making now, and we are passing like the point of no return. So again, that testing location is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on Hawaii Island. I think it's Maui, and
No,
it's
not
what
Hawaii. It's the big island on Hawaii, Mauna Loa.
oh, is that where it's at? Okay, and that's
you're going to get hate mail from Hawaii if you don't do that right. So it's it's on.
okay.
Mauna
Thank
Loa.
you. Yeah, it's cool. Thank you for correcting that.
Dormant volcano.
Okay, so again, that was earlier, and then we were talking about banks. Sorry, we were talking about insurance that are not supporting the fossil fuel industry anymore. But I also want to mention it's not just insurance companies that aren't going to be providing insurance. It's also the banks and the loans. And I think it was 2 years ago that I saw the World Bank. They made an announcement that they were not going to give like loans or funding towards the fossil fuel industry anymore. And I don't know much about this. I'm guessing it's one of the largest banks in the world. So that made a huge statement. And I know as Extinction Rebellion and a lot of other climate activists, they're going after Chase Bank because Chase is still funding the fossil fuel industry in different sectors. And they were, I think, funding the XL pipeline, which has now changed. So since we were just talking about education, educating kids, I do want to say that NASA has a really cool section on their website. And again, if you just Google search NASA kids, it just makes it really easy to for children. I don't know the age range for them to understand climate change. It's just cool that NASA created a whole section on their website just for the youth. It might be a lot more basic than Dave's book, but it does show the basics and covers some of that. And
Alex, let me just.
Those are some basic things that I want to cover.
Let me just let me just say.
No, I'm done.
With the kids thing in NASA, I did a video. I posted a video last night about some climate dashboards, so-called climate dashboards. It's like, NASA has an excellent one, as Alex was saying. NOAA also has their own separate one, and Bloomberg, believe it or not, has quite a good one as well, and also the UK Met Office. So these climate dashboards, they show some graphs, they show some of the key things like CO2, real time, current, what we're measuring right now on, say, Mauna Loa and other places in terms of CO2 levels, global average temperatures on land, on the oceans, from all different sources. There's about 4 or 5 different sources for those numbers, and they're all pretty much in agreement. There's some slight deviations. Lots of basic information that's very important, sort of basic metrics on ocean heat and so on and so forth. So there's 4 sites that I talked about in the last video. And, many of you probably know for the coronavirus, the Johns Hopkins University, they have a site that is sort of a go-to site for lots of the media and stuff about global numbers on the virus and all the individual countries and stuff. So there's more and more. The internet is great. There's tons of information, but you really do have to have some internal filters, if you like, on what you. There's a lot of misinformation out there too. So you've got to sort of, as you get more and more knowledge about different subjects, you tend to have better and better filters. But if you don't know much about any subject at all, it's very good to. I like, a lot of people in universities, they say, stay away from Wikipedia, stay away from Wikipedia. But if you don't know anything about a subject, I find that that's a very decent place to go to get basic information, lots of links to other places. It's well moderated, though it's mostly accurate information. I think it's a good first place to look at if you're if you don't know much about a subject and you want to know more about it. So the way you look for information is important. It's not just throw it in Google and see what happens, There's much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I just got a message from Sharif. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question to Paul?
Yeah.
Your friend Guy McPherson, he believes that mankind will go extinct in a couple of years because of climate change. What's your opinion on that? Do you agree with him, or do you?
No, I completely disagree with him.
Okay.
I always have.
Multiple people disagree with Guy, so we have different perspectives. He does have a good scientific background, so he brings a lot of good information into the show. But yeah, again, I guess some of us are not on the same level with time frame.
Yeah.
As far as that goes,
he's. I just count his timelines on when he says things, right? Like completely, right? And they change all the time. I mean, what's the current date? So, but he's been on this show before, and I've had some sessions with him. I've met him in person, and he is very knowledgeable. But I think you have to take any prediction that he makes and just say, well, that's what he does, and I just discount it completely.
There are merchants of doubt on both sides. There are merchants of doubt who say there is not a problem, and there are merchants of doubt who say the problem is so severe that we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And neither of them are encouraging to what I do. And so I pay no attention to the merchants of doubt on either side, and instead keep working on helping people to understand the problem, and more importantly, to take whatever action they personally can, and to put pressure on their governments and on institutions to take action as well. I put a link about the bank issue in the chat. It's banking on climate change, and there are still 35 banks that are considered to be villainous in this area. So we've got a lot of work to do on banks. They know where the money is, but I think the insurance companies, having jumped off ship, are going to make a little more wary of where they put the money.
Yeah, we really have to realize.
From Sharif.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We're going to have to start doing the concluding remarks. So Viva, if you'd like to add the statement you're just going to make in with your concluding remark, maybe 3 to 5 minutes each, so we could end around the 2-hour mark. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Viva.
Okay, thank you. I think we can all agree that climate change, at the very least, is being very costly now and is going to continue to cost us more. And if we can get everybody on that page, I think it'll be a big step forward for humanity. So that's one of the things I'd like to leave. I'm also putting in the Reduction Tech website where you can get more information. And as Paul mentioned, if you want a little introduction to hydroxyl, I do think that Wikipedia has a good introduction to it. And there is peer-reviewed literature about that compound and how it interacts in the natural system. We do want to advocate that the atmosphere needs to come under management as a piece of infrastructure. So that's how we're dealing with the government. so that they understand that it is infrastructure. So that's really all I have to say. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate everyone on the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully you can join some of the shows next week. So yeah, again, Sharif apologized. He lost his internet connection. So once we're done at the end of this show, we're all gonna leave the show, and it should close down correctly. But we can stay until the end. Lauren, would you like to go ahead and give your concluding remark?
Okay, so I just want to make a few comments about the scientific consensus. So basically, there was a study by John Cook from Skeptical Science, who basically said that the scientific consensus is about 97%. But there was another one, I'm going to look for it. There was another one from in the movie Merchants of Doubt, where basically it turned out that it was about 100% of they had like about 900 different scientific papers that they looked at over several years, and the scientific consensus was basically 100%. So depending on the way you calculate, the scientific consensus is between 97% and 100%. So it's really high, and that's one of the key information that people should be aware of. And also, I think it's important for people to be aware of how devastating climate change could really be, especially when you look at the increase in hurricanes, heat waves, wildfires, droughts, floods, desertification, and many, many other issues. There's also the spreading of tropical diseases by mosquitoes that have reached new areas. There could be wars over natural resources. There could be a huge amount of climate refugees. As there are shortages of food and water, which will affect many people, there could also be wars over natural resources. As different nations compete for a limited amount of water and food. So there's a lot of impacts of climate change. There's also the extinction crisis, where over 1 million species could go extinct by the end of the century. So people should be aware of how bad climate change is. It's not enough just to know that climate change exists, but people need to know why it's important. I think those are my concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Dave, would you like to give your concluding remark?
Yeah, since I'm speaking to people primarily in Asia, and this book is in English and Spanish, if somebody in your country wants to make it into English and your language, we'd be very happy to have that happen. So go to greenactioneers.com and Dave Finnegan at greenactioneers.com, and I'd be happy to talk to you about turning this book into something that would work for your population as well as it works for English and Spanish speaking populations. We've got a distributor now to take it to schools in Latin America, and so that's going to take care of the Americas, but we need the rest of the world to jump on board and to learn how to go green. So please get in touch with me, Dave Finnegan at greenactioneers.com. Happy to talk to you about your language. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Donald, would you like to continue with your closing remark? What you'd like to add?
Yeah, this has been a great show. It's really interesting, and I think that we're at a state now where there's no way to reverse the damage, some of the damage that's already been done, hopefully maybe with some of the mitigation technologies. But part of what we're going to have to start thinking about is what we're going to do in the world that's coming in the future. And to add to what Lauren said, we're already having wars over climate change. The Syrian civil war was created because of climate change problems. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's going to, even in the United States, you're going to see people having to move from the South because it's going to become so inhospitable in a very short period of time that people can't live there. I mean, it's ridiculous to think you live in New Orleans or Houston or someplace like that, where every 3 years the town is wiped out and you have to rebuild it. I mean, hello, how long is that going to last? And so it's already happening, and there's a lot of saying that in adversity comes opportunity. And one of the things that I'm always on about is how important it is to have people find ways of making a living, making change. So, as I've said in almost every show, that you have an opportunity, whenever there's a problem, you have an opportunity to solve that problem and create a business that has you make a living. And people are always often asking, well, how do you find problems? And if you look around at climate change, you can't look out your window without finding problems that you might be able to do something about. And I'm really impressed by all the people on this panel, because they're all doing that. I mean, everyone here is doing that. And so I think that one of the things you can take away from this panel is that you can actually make a career and a life out of helping deal with these changes that we're in the middle of and are going to get much, much worse very, very shortly. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, I'll go ahead and give, thank you, Donald. I'll go ahead and give my concluding remark, and then I'll pass it over to Paul. So some of the things that I wanted to mention, Edward earlier in the show kind of set the stage for climate denial, if anyone's been watching this entire show. So there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation. Laurent continues to provide us with, sources of, against, what's that? Skeptical science, skeptical scientist. Maybe Laurent, if you have, maybe you can post that in the comment section so other people can see it. Cool, thank you. I really liked this one video that was on Facebook, and it might be kind of hard to find, but I think it's if you search in Facebook, it's okay to be smart. 97%. It's like a 10-minute video, 5-minute video. It just shows the whole process of what goes through scientific review. It's not just some simple thing where a couple scientists are like, oh yeah, it's a complicated process to have anything scientifically reviewed. And even though we mentioned I have some of my doubts about what Guy says and some of the time frame, he has had one thing peer reviewed by other scientists, and I also have met him, and I was at an event where I was the keynote speaker and he was the main speaker, and I was talking about climate change from a disaster standpoint and responding and implementing emergency protocols and adapting and all of that. And then he was talking about the time frame. So hopefully we have more time because we have so much to lose. And earlier in this conversation, I expressed that it frustrates me and it makes me angry with people like Edward saying that there's no climate change. But then we got to think, why does that make me angry? Well, I have 2 younger sisters, and one of them has children. I mean, it makes me angry because that misinformation that's being spread is putting the innocent children and all of the sentient beings living on Earth at risk of unnecessary suffering and unnecessary pain. So that's why it makes me angry, is because we know that there's a problem and we're trying to desperately work towards solutions. Len mentioned that he's seen changes throughout his life. I did a Facebook post. Who has noticed some changes throughout their lifetime related to climate change or in their area? And there was just comment after comment after comment. It doesn't snow anymore. It doesn't rain. More rain, less rain. Just all kinds of comments from what people have noticed. So the climate is changing, and we will continue to see more changes, and we have to try our best to adapt as a society, be smart, be vigilant, and educate others through platforms like this. So I do think this was a really good discussion. I learned a lot from all of you, and congratulations, Viva, on your projects and your accomplishments, and providing that information to all of us. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Viva. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Paul, and thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, the Merchants of Doubt is a book, of course, by Naomi Oreskes, I believe, and then they did the great documentary on it. So if you haven't read the book, it's a very good read. It's more than you want to know about the denial industry. And yeah, so people often ask me, so where are we heading in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, etc. So from the best that I can see is that the Arctic is becoming a much darker place. It's reflecting a lot less sunlight as it loses sea ice and snow cover in the spring. And we're heading very rapidly to a time when there'll be no Arctic sea ice at the end of a summer. So 5 to 10 years, who knows? The timing is difficult to pin down, but the trends are all pointing to no sea ice 1 September in the near future. And when that occurs, of course, mostly in terms of the effect on the reflection of sunlight, September, the sun's already getting very, very low on the horizon in the Arctic. So it's more of the loss of sea ice in the summer months, July, August, when the sun is at the highest point in the Arctic. That has the biggest impact on the solar radiation balance in the Arctic. Of course, as you lose sea ice, it's replaced by the dark ocean underneath, which absorbs the sunlight as opposed to reflects it. So, once we lose that Arctic sea ice, I call it a blue ocean event. When there's no sea ice in the Arctic Ocean, and that will be the first time in a very, very long time. Then what next? So it will with the sea ice gone. Of course, ice takes a lot of energy to melt. So if you have a kilogram of ice and you apply energy to it, and it melts. Now you have a kilogram of water at the same, slightly higher temperature, just above zero as opposed to below zero if it's fresh water. Then apply that same amount of energy that melted that kilogram of ice, and it would warm that kilogram of water at just above freezing to 70 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that's just gives you an idea of the ice acts as a refrigerator. It keeps the Arctic cold. When there's no ice, the Arctic temperature will skyrocket up. So after, let's say, the first blue ocean event happens in X number of years, X being 5 to 10. Then what happens in X plus 1 years? So within a few years, those additional feedbacks will likely cause the duration of an ice-free Arctic. Instead of just being a few weeks in September or maybe the month of September, it will go to the bracketing months. There'll be no ice in August, September, and October. And if you follow this trajectory forward, it's very likely that within a decade, there's no sea ice year-round in the Arctic. The Arctic is a completely transformed place. It's much, much warmer. Of course, what's the only cold area up there that's going to be left? Well, obviously Greenland, and the melt rate, the calving and ice melt on Greenland will greatly accelerate. So, and Greenland will be the last cold holdout in the Arctic. So if you take the center of Greenland at 73 degrees north latitude, I think that the jet stream circulation, not only do the jet streams slow down and become wavier and stuck, but the center of rotation shifts to being more over Greenland, the center of Greenland, and over the North Pole offset towards Greenland. So we're going to get a huge disruption of circulation of heat and in oceans and the atmosphere, and just air circulation pattern completely switch, ocean circulation pattern completely switch, and therefore weather patterns over most parts of the planet will change, and areas that were great food producing regions because they had the proper temperature and precipitation levels will no longer have those optimums. So food yields will significantly drop, and we're going to have huge disruption in society. And we'll look back on 2020 as saying, it's a stable.
It wasn't that bad.
Stable year, right? We'll look back to this time period as having a stable climate. So this is where we're heading now. This is the ghost of future. Think of Christmas Carol and Scrooge, the Gulf. This is what future may be. We still have human agency to basically change the path that we're heading on. But I've described the path we're heading on at the moment. Anyway, thanks everybody for being here today. Thanks to all the panelists and
Yeah,
people watching.
thank you, Paul. All right, so since Sharif's not here, we're just all gonna just hit the leave button, and hopefully it logs everyone out and shuts down the program. And hope to see some of you or all of you next week. There's gonna be more discussions. And if Sharif's watching, thank you, Sharif, for another great show, and all the other viewers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Goodbye.